Hello, and thank you for tuning in to Starting Small, a podcast about brand development, entrepreneurship, and innovation in the modern world. In this episode, I'm joined by Wylie Robinson, CEO and founder of Rumpl, a blanket made for everywhere. While camping with his co-founder, Wylie realized the void in the versatility of indoor blankets. This inspired him to sew their first prototype, which became Rumpl as we know it today. Hello, and thank you for tuning in to Starting Small. Today, I'm joined by Wylie Robinson of Rumpl. Wylie, thank you so much for joining me today.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah, so I want to start out with your upbringing. So where did you grow up and what was your childhood like?
I grew up in San Francisco, California. My childhood was really enjoyable. There was an interesting window for my generation, my friends, where the Presidio of San Francisco was a former military base, and it was deactivated and left unoccupied for about 12 years from probably about 1989 or 1990, around then, through early 2000. I'm not sure exactly when the date was that redevelopment of that area came about, but it resulted in about a decade where it was essentially just a big national park in the middle of the city. So
Yeah.
I've talked about this quite a bit with some friends that I grew up with, and we just had this amazing opportunity to have access to a world-class city and also just incredible recreation right there in the city. So really unique time to grow up in San Francisco. And I think it's influenced certainly the way I look at the world and the way a lot of my friends do as well.
For sure. Did you have an entrepreneurship mindset growing up, say lemonade stands or start any other products?
Yeah, I did. Without really knowing it, I did kind of all of those things.
Yeah.
One sort of funny one, in San Francisco, there was a big sinkhole in probably 1990 or so. This neighborhood had a big sinkhole in it and actually swallowed a couple of houses. And it became sort of a tourist attraction for people to come by and observe these houses falling into this sinkhole. Nobody was hurt or injured or anything because it was noticed early enough that the occupants of these houses could vacate. But my cousin and I, we were like, 5 or 6 years old, and we made this little stand called Sinkhole Cigars. And it was literally just tape. It was cotton balls rolled up in a paper with a bunch of talcum powder in them. And when you blow on them, the fake smoke would come out. I mean, it's a ridiculous little thing, but we're like in first grade here, and we're trying to sell Sinkhole Cigars for $1 to tourists. And there were a couple people that were just really generous and bought some of our cigars and probably threw them away right away. But without knowing it, I always had little hustles and little things to do. It wasn't necessarily because I was super passionate about starting a business. I just found it kind of fun to make something and sell it.
For sure. Yeah, that sounds very interesting. So in 2003, you went to the University of Colorado at Boulder.
Yep.
What did you study there?
I studied environmental design in the Environmental Design College with an emphasis in architecture, and I also got a minor in business.
Were you involved with any athletics or clubs during your time?
Yeah, there's a really highly ranked NCAA Division I cycling team there, and I raced on the downhill, and at the time it was mountain cross team. And I later went on to race professionally after college, kind of regional professional, around the mountain states and nationally. Never made enough money to do that or was good enough to do that professionally, as a source of income, primary source of income. But that was a big part of my life, and sort of my whole social scene was kind of revolving around biking.
Awesome. Did you go there on scholarship or no?
No, I went there, as an out-of-state student. And the reason why I selected Colorado was both the presence of a strong design program and also a strong cycling team. So it was something I looked at from the beginning.
Awesome. So what was your overall experience like at that university then? Was it overall pretty good?
Yeah, it was amazing. I joke with people that ask me about it. I wouldn't trade a Harvard degree for my experience at Boulder. It was perfect for me at the time. And it allowed me to be serious about my studies, but also, recreate and spend a good amount of time outside, because there's just so much to do right there. It was just a really fun school, really inspiring school. Great weather in Boulder. Nothing but good things to say about it.
Awesome. So following college and prior to Rumpl, what kind of jobs were you working then at this time?
So for probably 3 summers while in college, I worked on a construction crew,
Okay.
and I started at the very very bottom of that rung, largely doing the demolition part of the construction. So it was an independent contractor who would buy kind of dumpy houses in Denver, put a little bit of money into them, and then flip them. And we would usually do 3 or 4 a summer.
Hmm.
And in the beginning there, I was doing the dirtiest work. Moving the old appliances out. I remember one time where there was a beehive under the house in a crawl space. And we went and
Hmm.
got me like a hazmat suit and this big air canister of bee repellent, and I crawled in there on my stomach and just shot this thing for 5 minutes until the canister ran out. So it
Oh
was like
man.
the dirtiest, worst work on the
Yeah.
crew. But I graduated slowly up to being able to kind of like help build the decks and some more kind of light non-finished carpentry, and that was really helpful. It aligned well with my major of architecture because I saw we'd be breaking down walls and checking out all the framing and everything. So it was really cool in that sense. And then my senior year, I got an office job. Those couple of years before that had been outside, obviously, and spending
Hmm.
a lot of time using my hands. My senior year, I got an office job as an intern at a big architecture firm in Denver
Okay.
called Gensler. And Gensler is one of the largest architecture firms in the world. And that was my first real exposure to like corporate big business architecture. I was wearing business casual. The office was totally quiet. You could hear a pin drop. I wasn't
Hmm.
a huge fan of it, to be honest. Um,
Yeah.
I enjoyed the experience, and some of the people I met were really cool, but my impact was just like nothing. I remember this whole summer, I'm a senior about to graduate with a design degree, and I designed a window louver for
Hmm.
the whole time I was there. So it was like I designed this one little mechanical component that was going to go on probably a 80-story building or something in Shanghai. Just huge project, and it was cool to be able to have a touch on the overall project in that way. But in the grand scheme of things, that impact is just nothing. So
Yeah.
I realized pretty quickly that architecture, or at least architecture at that scale, was not something I was totally interested in.
So with this internship at this time following college, did you continue working for that same firm or did you venture off somewhere else?
No, I ended up getting a job right before I graduated. I kind of overlapped with my final semester and this job, which was part time, with a great design agency in Boulder called Communication Arts.
Hmm.
And Communication Arts was it was really multidisciplinary. So they did everything from architectural conceptual rendering to packaging design to identity and branding. And I was specifically working mostly on the conceptual architecture side. So what we would do is we would work with development groups that were doing big, large scale retail projects, and we would work with them to illustrate a mature project for the public, for marketing purposes, and for some of the brokers of the space to go solicit tenants. So if you see a big, lifestyle center or high-end shopping mall or something that's going in your community, you often see on the chain link fence outside of the project this like sort of beautiful wispy rendering, like watercolor drawing, for instance, of what that project will look like when it's mature. So it's got
Hmm.
mature trees and shoppers walking around carrying bags, smiling. We would create those assets.
Okay.
And what those were used for is both, getting buy-in from the community that was getting this new lifestyle center, and also selling in to big retailers to occupy the space in advance of the building being constructed. So let's say I don't know, just let's say Gap or something wanted to occupy
Hmm.
70,000 square feet or something in this new lifestyle center. Those renderings that we created would help sell that project to Gap, so that they would say, okay,
Okay.
we like the look of this, we think this is a good space for us to be in, and we'll sign up here. Just one of the things that would be shown to Gap or a similar tenant to sign on to the project.
Gotcha. So Rumpl comes about in around 2013. So what inspired you to go this direction and more specifically enter the blanket industry?
Well, there's a little bit of time that would elapse between this most recent job I was just talking about and
Yeah.
what led me to the job I was holding right before Rumpl. So I was working for
Okay.
Communication Arts around 2007. That's about when I graduated. I was there for 2.5 years or so, and then the company contracted considerably during the recession in 2008. I was laid off and did a bunch of odd jobs for, a year or two. And then I moved back to the Bay Area, which I'm from, and started working for another branding agency there called Landor. And Landor, like Gensler, is a really large kind of internationally known design agency specializing in all sorts of design touch points, from identity to signage to strategy, writing, naming, all that stuff. So that's really where I got my exposure to branding and kind of like storytelling and narrative design. And that really, I think, is the skill set that's carried over the most into Rumpl, and where I add value to the company in Rumpl. So fast forward a little bit to 2013. I actually fast forward to 2012. I'm on a ski trip with a good friend of mine. We are skiing just outside Mammoth. We're sleeping in the car and ready to get up the next day and go skiing. And our car completely froze that night. And we woke up the next morning and couldn't turn the car on. We pretty much had to just wait around for somebody to show up to get us out of the spot we were staying in, and bundled up in our sleeping bags and just waited. And during that time we waited, we both acknowledged that we really weren't that uncomfortable. We were in this rather sketchy situation. What, would be a pretty uncomfortable and freezing situation was not bad because of these sleeping bags. And we started talking about the materials and how we like the materials a lot better than our comforters back home. So we decided to make this sleeping bag blanket. And when we eventually got out of there, we got back to San Francisco. We made these things, sewed them up ourselves. And that was sort of the end of it for a while. And not much happened for about a year. Then, come the end of 2013, a bunch of our friends had said that this was a really cool product. They liked the idea. They'd be interested in something like this. And we said, well, let's just try launching this thing on Kickstarter. So my friend and I created a Kickstarter campaign and launched what became Rumpl, and ended up raising about $250,000 in 30 days. And the back to your original question of how Rumpl came about, it's sort of it's the pairing of my background in outdoor and my love for outdoor recreation with my background in design. And my partner was an industrial designer, an engineer. And so he largely was in charge of a lot of the sourcing and communication with the factory at the time. And I was really in charge of, the brand and how things looked and felt, and the eventual story that kind of became the Rumpl story.
Gotcha. So what did that first prototype look like when you and your partner went back home and started creating this blanket?
It's bright orange. It was just kind of some off-the-shelf fabric we found. It's a nylon fabric, ripstop fabric. This was the first, and really kind of still is, one of the only things I've ever sewn with a sewing machine. So it's not square at all. The finishing of it is horrible. We built two prototypes first. The first was one where we essentially created the shell, the sleeve, if you will, of the blanket without keeping one edge sewn down. Then we tacked the insulation to that shell, and then flipped the thing inside out, and then finished off that open edge. The second one was one where we actually moved a stitch line in from the edge, probably 5 or 6 inches, and tacked down the insulation with a sew through that happened on the inside of the boundary of the blanket. And we ultimately didn't like how that one looked as much, so we decided to tack down the insulation on the edges. That's still how our blankets are constructed. Of course, they now have stitch lines going through them that create sort of interesting design. But that really, kind of the first one that we did, although it was not square and the finishing was horrible and the material has changed quite a bit, that's essentially the construction that we're using today.
Gotcha. So you mentioned Kickstarter. Were you selling blankets by this time, or was this following the prototype that you just mentioned?
So we went from prototypes, hand sewn by Wylie and Nick, who was my co-founder, to, I think we had 1 or 2 samples from a factory, and those were what we used to create our Kickstarter video.
Okay. And then
from there, it was we sold, 18 or 1900 or 2000 or something. I don't remember what it was, but it was like we had 1 prototype that we used for the video, and then we were off to production.
So what did that Kickstarter campaign look like? So I know a lot of people do it. They can just do it for specifically funding with no reward. Were customers coming on there and buying blankets and that's how you were funding, or what did the campaign specifically look like?
Yeah, it was, they were shopping products. We had four
Yeah.
colors we were offering, which of course were just images that I had photoshopped. We didn't
Mm-hmm.
actually have four color prototypes. And then we were offering it at the time, it was four sizes. So we
Okay.
had a throw size, a twin size, a queen size, and a king size. We've later contracted down quite a bit. So we had four sizes, and we've now moved to one person and two person size. We find that
Mm.
that better aligns with consumers' expectations with like tent sizing and just being a little more familiar with that type of language for what size they should buy.
Yeah.
We also have a junior size, which is sort of out of that mix, and that's kind of like a kid's blanket. But yeah, so we were selling four different sizes in, I believe it was four different colors. We were figuring out all the things that were driving purchase intent at that time. So we did one where it was like you could get a blue blanket with a red accent, and you could get a blue blanket with a white accent. Ultimately,
Mm.
found out that the accent wasn't a real driver for people, so they care more about the larger blue color of the whole thing. So we
Yeah.
don't do that anymore. Now it's like if you want to get a red one, it only comes with one accent type. If you want to get a blue one, it comes with one blue accent type.
Okay. And if you don't mind, how much funding was acquired on that first Kickstarter campaign?
Yeah, so the total amount raised, I believe, before add-ons, which I can get
Mm-hmm.
to in a second, was I think 237,000.
Okay.
Over about, I think we were live for 30 days or 35 days. You can also add on some rewards after the fact. We use a service called Backer Kit, and
Mm-hmm.
basically when somebody's checking out, they're entering all their shipping information after the campaign is closed. They can then add on more rewards. They can buy more blankets. They can add T-shirts and hats and stickers and things like that. So when all that was said and done, I think the total came out to just shy of 250,000.
Okay.
And then we were not super efficient then with our money. So I think in total we netted about $50,000 of net income at the end of
Mm.
that. So we spent a whole lot shipping product around and getting product to our warehouse. Setting up a warehouse, paying sort of a premium to get something set up in short order. We also at the time had the campaign open globally, so we were shipping
Oh, wow.
some units we were shipping to really obscure addresses and just paying an arm and a leg for shipping, which we did not pass on to the customer at the time. We covered shipping,
Okay.
so that ate into a lot of our profit.
Mm. So once established, how did you begin to market at this time, along with what was the main demographic that you were focusing on?
Well, I'll start with the sort of the second question, which was the demographic, and it
Okay.
really was not very sophisticated. I mean, we did some surveying after the campaign where we got age, gender, sociographic kind of breakdowns, and what we found largely was that the people buying our products were pretty similar to me and my co-founder. It was people that
Yeah.
generally live in urban environments, like recreating outside, have kind of above average disposable income. We had pretty much dead down the middle, male female split, which was great. There was a lot of opportunity there that we identified. And so what I'm getting at is what we came to was we're just going to build products that we would like to have. We're going to build style that we would like to have, colors that we'd like to have, functionality that we'd like to have, and hope that our consumers align with that, and that those are
Yeah.
essentially the people that we're selling to is people like us. And that's actually a recommendation I would give to anybody starting a company. Later on, when your company gets more mature and you have more resources to do significant surveying and profiling and everything, you can sharpen that point. But in the beginning, it's going to be the most authentic and the most easy for you to build a company that targets a customer that's like you.
For sure.
So that's kind of how we started, and that's what we focused on for quite a while, actually, first couple of years.
So yeah, so what marketing avenues did you guys decide to use, such as like social media and other aspects? Because that dollar amount for that Kickstarter campaign is pretty impressive. So how did you reach those customers?
Yeah, we still didn't do a huge amount of paid advertising at that time. So we were
Okay.
doing, Facebook and Instagram, but it wasn't like a whole lot of promoted posts and things like that. Mostly that $50,000 went back into the next production run. So we
Okay.
used the money we made obviously to create the products that our backers purchased, and fulfill those. And then the remaining 50,000 went right back into more production. We didn't pay ourselves for about 2 years. So
Okay.
any money generated went back into production. We did some minimal things here and there. Like we hired a PR agency pretty shortly after the campaign, which was, relatively cheap at the time. It was like $2,000 or $3,000 a month. That was really helpful actually, because they got us a couple of key media placements. We got into Gear Junkie and Outside Magazine and some outdoor publications like this, which really helped raise awareness. But it was really organic. I mean, we spent a lot of time just hustling and being everywhere, and by everywhere I mean in person. And fortunately in San Francisco, which is where we were at the time, there's just a lot of events and places you can be. We
For sure.
did some vending at street fairs and like Outside Lands Music Festival. We showed up at a lot of events and just gatherings where people could see the product and meet us and hear about what we were doing. And it was just like a lot of organic word of mouth in those early years. And it wasn't a super, well thought out strategic marketing funnel or anything that we had created.
Gotcha. So I was looking at the website, and I'm not sure what time you entered this area, but you guys also offer dog beds, towels, and other non-blanket products. What made you explore this area?
So, for starters, 90% of our revenue comes from blankets largely. We have a number of different types of blankets, but if you group all of them together as blankets or not blankets, which is kind of how we have our taxonomy on the site. If you look at the top navigation menu, 90% of the revenue is generated from blankets. Those other things, towels specifically, that's sort of a seasonality bridging tactic. So we sell a lot more in Q4 and in colder months, and in June, July, and August and hot times of the year, we can talk about towels. It's a sort of natural extension for us to create something like that.
Sure.
It's just another thing to talk about during those months when people aren't necessarily thinking about blankets. And then with the dog bed, there was two reasons for that. The first was we just constantly get photos that people send us of their dogs or pets using Rumpls. The product works really well for that. It sheds pet hair really well. It's pretty indestructible, so people aren't worried about a dog messing it up or anything. And then additionally, we had developed a relationship with Kelly Lund, who's the owner of like a really famous dog, Loki, the wolf dog, who has a huge Instagram following. I didn't know, it's kind of funny, but he's got like 2 million Instagram followers, and we developed this relationship with Kelly just through meeting him at outdoor retailer and various industry things. And we thought, all right, well, we clearly have a consumer base that is dog owners. A lot of people send us imagery of dogs. We've got this, personal relationship with somebody who has access to like a big dog influencer. Maybe we can sort of pair those things and make a custom dog product that speaks to that dog owner and also is endorsed by a famous dog.
That's awesome.
And supported by a famous dog. So rather than make a dog blanket, we thought, all right, well, let's actually try to enter this space with an interesting, unique product. And for us, after quite a bit of analysis, we determined that we hadn't seen a really just bomber portable dog bed. There's a lot of great dog beds out there that, Yeti makes one that's like $400. There's a lot out there. Filson makes a really cool one. But they're all, they're foam and they're not super portable, right? Like they weigh a few pounds and you wouldn't be able to collapse that thing down. If you traveled or took a big road trip, it wouldn't make a lot of sense to bring that. So we thought, all right, well, let's create, kind of the outdoor rugged dog bed that's actually portable. And what that resulted in was essentially a reversible sleeve with an air pad inside it. So the sleeve can be put on with polyester on the outside, recycled polyester on the outside for kind of like a more outdoor, moisture wicking feel and look. And then you can reverse that, and there's a Sherpa fleece on the other side for like a cozier, maybe you're more indoor and you're not necessarily trying to shed away debris and pine needles and things like that. And then the air mattress is pretty much the same air mattress you'd find in a camping set. So it's a bonded sidewall with a self-inflating valve, and it works really well. And we have had a lot of positive feedback. We just launched that product on Kickstarter let's see, it was last fall, so fall 2019, and we just
Okay.
shipped it to backers like 2 months ago. So
Okay.
it's been in the wild now for about 2 months, and we've just had great feedback on it so far.
That's
It's
awesome.
what I mentioned before. It's not a huge part of our business at all, but
Yeah,
it is a really good solution for the customer that's looking for that type of a product for a travel situation that might have a big, sort of rugged outdoorsy dog.
for sure. So if a customer bought one of those, could they expect that to feel the same as a Rumpl blanket? Is it the same external material then?
Yeah, it's the exact same material. In
Okay.
majority of our products, our two kind of most popular franchises are the original Puffy Blanket and the Nanoloft Puffy Blanket, and they
Mhm.
both use a 30D post-consumer recycled polyester shell. They
Okay.
have different fills, which is what distinguishes them from each other, but that's the same material that we use on the dog bed. And then the
Mhm.
inner is a really nice Sherpa fleece that we developed, which is also post-consumer recycled.
Gotcha. So looking at Rumpl today, what would you say separates your blankets from competitors?
Well, I think first and foremost, Rumpl is kind of the original version of this. There
Mhm.
are other kind of like outdoor technical blankets that other larger companies have made. Like I know North Face made one, and what I've heard at least is those products were largely made for sort of like the tip of the spear pinnacle athletes that these
Mhm.
companies sponsor. So if someone was going and climbing K2 or something like that and didn't want to remove their boots at night, North Face or a similar company might create a blanket for them that they could use instead of a sleeping bag,
Hmm.
a quilt instead of a sleeping bag. And so the product was never like marketed in a major way to the everyday consumer. And
Hmm.
Rumpl definitely, looks at the category from a kind of outdoor recreation lens, but also just every day.
Yeah.
We find that customers are mostly using the products, on their patio, on their deck, kind of car camping, like really not super hardcore activities. And it's just the positioning of the brand and the product that's a little bit it's a little less hardcore than some of these other companies that have made a similar product in the past. So that's the first one,
Mhm.
is we're kind of the original coming to the category with this outlook on it.
Mm.
The next, I would say, Rumpl. You know, I mean, this is obviously a subjective thought here, but I think that we have the most credibility in the category, and we're able to get the coolest artists, the coolest brands to work with us. A lot of the competitors that I've seen pop up in recent years, that kind of just rip off our designs and our aesthetic, and we really kind of originated that. And for that reason, the best people want to work with us. So we get the best collaborations, we get the best artists, and I think that's another thing that consumers really care about, is having
Mm.
great partnerships like that and kind of purchasing from the originator of the category.
For sure. So I want to touch on actually your Shark Tank experience, and to the listeners out there, Wiley, I don't know when you were on it specifically, but they were just aired on Shark Tank. And yeah, overall, what was that experience like for you as an entrepreneur?
Yeah, I mean, it was intense, for a
Yeah.
variety of reasons. I mean, I've both done a decent amount of, on camera stuff, although much more kind of small time, like local news and things like that. Decent amount of time in front of the camera.
For sure.
So from that perspective, it was way more intense. I mean, hot studio lights shining on you, big cameras, big production. That was a really big deal. Hair, makeup department, and everything. That was intense. And then additionally, I've raised money for the company before, and I've had plenty of pitches and plenty of experience pitching the business and hashing it out with investors for why I think the company is worth what I say it is. And
Mhm.
it was way more intense in that regard as well. Just lightning fast conversation and questioning. And they edited it down to about 8 or 10 minutes, but I was in there for 90 minutes talking to those guys.
Wow.
So it was full on, super intense the whole time. um, Shark Tank and NBC is an organization I've been talking to for years. Actually, they they started talking to Rumpl, I think, back when they were in like season 8 or something like that. They're now in season 12. And
Mhm.
at the time, I'd always thought, I just don't know if this is the right thing for Rumpl to do. Most of the products I had seen on there were like kind of one-off, really protectable products where they had some serious IP or protection around the product that created a moat around them that nobody could come and duplicate that. Rumpl really doesn't have that. I mean, we have some protection. We've got a couple trademarks, on some key things, our stitch lines, our name, our logo, some of the technology we've developed, et cetera. But for the most part, people can replicate, and people have replicated the product that we're making. And so I thought I was going to get chewed out for that reason. But this year they approached me and they said, Shark Tank is gaining more notoriety as a platform that really helps launch businesses. And we are soliciting more businesses this season that are a little more mature and at a bigger scale, maybe profitable businesses, to further bolster the legitimacy of Shark Tank as a platform for real businesses. So it's not just like little mom and pop, lemonade stands. There's obviously plenty of that mixed in there, but specifically on season 12, there's a number of companies that have been in business for several years. They're profitable. They've reached some degree of scale. So I thought, all right, this is an intention of NBC ABC. Sorry if I said NBC before. ABC to make the show a little bit more legitimate from that perspective. And I think that it's a good opportunity for Rumpl to gain some exposure to a national audience. And also, like the whole reason why I went on there, in addition to it being a cool experience to have as a business owner, is we do actually want to get into sports licensing. And that's what I went in there pitching. We've got a good business in the outdoor and kind of adjacent lifestyle categories. And we've got a profitable business there and we're growing there. But there's a big opportunity that we see in sports licensing. And it's a super nuanced, really complicated channel to navigate. A lot of politics, a lot of people touching the product and the licenses and the royalties and all that stuff. And my thought was, partnering with somebody like Cuban, for instance, could fast track that process and just get that straight, access to the leagues. And we could do our negotiations directly there rather than go through a bunch of intermediaries. So the intent was twofold. It was certainly to have a great experience as an entrepreneur and get some great media exposure, but also because I thought that there was a real opportunity to partner with one of these sharks and fast track our way into sports licensing.
For sure. So I've had some other guests that have been on Shark Tank as well. And I don't know if you realized at the scale you guys are at, but did you notice once it aired the spike in sales or what did that look like?
We did. And candidly, like I talked to a bunch of companies that had been on Shark Tank also, after we did our taping and everything. And the ranges of what people experienced after really varied. Some people, it was like, okay, we did 2x a normal day on our air night. And some people were like, we did 30x a normal day. And I think that really has to do with the amount of awareness that the company has built up in advance of being shown. If you already have a pretty solid and sophisticated digital marketing strategy and you're already prospecting consumers and bringing them into your site and everything, you might not necessarily see that much of a spike. Whereas if you're, like a single cell organism company and you have no awareness whatsoever, and all of a sudden 5 million people see your brand, your site might crash. Like it might be just this huge influx of traffic that you're totally not used to. We saw probably a 3.5 to 4x revenue spike, day of airing, day after, and it's gradually kind of tailed off, but it's been a smaller, initial pop than we were expecting with a longer tail, which we'd prefer, frankly. I'd rather not just get a big spike of customers coming in and then not develop any kind of relationship with them. But what we are seeing is that tail actually is lasting a little bit longer, and people are coming in, checking out the brand, considering it, and then maybe coming back a couple of days later to actually make a purchase.
Awesome. So if you would share one piece of advice that you would have for an aspiring entrepreneur, maybe something you've learned or regret, just anything.
Yeah. I would say this advice is for not necessarily an aspiring entrepreneur, but an actual entrepreneur that's in it, that's already started a company and is kind of battling through those first couple of years of starting a company and all the challenges that come with it. I would say one thing I regret doing a little bit in the early days is just not being present with, sort of like where I was on my journey. It always felt like I was pushing towards the next thing and kind of like living a little bit frantically and not really enjoying my time in those early phases. I mean, when I look back on some of the activities that I did in the early days, I mentioned it earlier, but like going and vending at a street fair or something, I mean, that was fun. We were hanging out, meeting people, drinking beers, like, just having a good time. And it was relaxing and mellow. And it wasn't totally critical that it went off without a hitch when I look back on it. At the time, it felt so important to me. And I treated it that way, which, probably is one of the reasons why Rumpl has been fairly successful to date is just the importance I've given to every step of the journey. But in hindsight, I think it would have been fun to, maybe take a step back, take a breather, and realize that this is a pretty cool situation you found yourself in, and just enjoy this moment, because it only gets more intense and more critical, and the stakes are higher as you scale. So enjoying the kind of present moment you're in it sounds a little cheesy, but it is, at least for me, has been very true. And hopefully, I look back on where we're at now in a couple of years and say, oh man, that was so mellow back then. And I've been able now, at least in my journey as an entrepreneur, to be able to take a step back and enjoy the current phase that I'm in.
Well, Wylie, thank you so much for joining me. And to the listeners out there, make sure to check out Rumpl at rumpl.com. Hey, thank you for listening to this episode of Starting Small. If you would, leave a review on whatever platform you're listening on. Also, follow Starting Small Pod on social platforms to keep up to date on future guests.